Hello, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. And we start with a nice question from Cardo. Um, Hello, Cardo. Nice to see you. Okay, Cardo asks, uh, some days it seems as I can't create the right tension in my lips and things don't feel right. There is not a good response and I have area attacks. Why is that happening? Could it be a sign of fatigue, although I don't feel any tiredness or burning sensation? So I want to focus mostly on that last question because the fatigue that we feel, if you feel that kind of fatigue, the tiredness or the burning, you are way past the fatigue that we should even tolerate on the trumpet. I want to make that real clear, so I'm going to say it one more time. The fatigue that we feel, so, and the way I've been explaining this for decades now, the way I've been explaining this is to compare the size of the muscle to other muscles in the body. So we have, for example, the thigh muscle is hundreds of times bigger. The thigh muscle is hundreds of times bigger than this muscle here. So think about how muscles work and the kind of lactic acid. So that burning that you feel is lactic acid. It's the byproduct of the ATP stuff. It's been a long time since I've studied that, but the process of the muscles using up energy, the byproduct of that, once they reach the anaerobic stage, is lactic acid. That lactic acid creates that burn that you feel in the muscle. This muscle is so small, and the way we use that muscle is the orbicularis oris muscle. Orbicularis is, we have one, two, three, four orbicularis muscles, one here, two here, and one back there. So, um, and the orbicularis is to the process of trumpet playing. Uh, let's say that the trumpet playing is very sensitive to the fatigue of orbicularis, the orbicularis oris. Okay, the the process of trumpet playing is extremely sensitive to the fatigue of that muscle. In other words, the threshold of how much fatigue affects our playing is like here, and the amount of fatigue that we have to have to create that lactic acid is up here. What I'm trying to do is paint a picture here that says you should never get to that point when you're practicing. Now, on the gig, that's a different story. On the gig, you have to do what you have to do. When you're practicing, you should never feel that burn. Now, some people talk about burn in the corners. Um, I even disagree with that. The corner thing is a conjunction of muscles that come together. There's, if you look at the anatomy of the face, it's a um, fascinating group of muscles here because you have like muscles that come from your nose down, you have muscles that come from your chin to the corners, chin up to here, from back here to here. It's like a big crisscross, and that's partly so that we can have all the facial expressions and stuff like that. But um, when we play the horn, those muscles pull against each other. So we have the orbicularis oris pulling in, and all the other muscles pulling against the orbicularis oris. And that's when you overdo that. You have these guys talking, and really, from my perspective, these guys sound like they have a paranoia for body tension, like they're just afraid. Anything that might produce any body tension whatsoever, they're always afraid of it. Okay, and I don't share that. I believe that there has to be some body tension. The problem is when you have excess or unnecessary body tension. And we can talk about that. I think I'm going to make a video about that sometime soon. But yes, we have a lot of times you can have excess body tension here with those muscles that are pulling against the orbicularis oris. Okay, but we have to have some of that. We have to have, you don't have an embouchure without that body tension. Without that tension, there is no embouchure. The one group of muscles has to pull against the other group of muscles. That's the definition of body tension. And if you don't have that, you don't have an embouchure. If you don't have that, you can't have the ability to move the notes up and down. Okay? So it's when we do too much of that, right? If those muscles are pulling against each other too hard, that's when you're going to get that burn. So the bottom line is you should never feel that burn. So how do we know when we've reached that point of fatigue that says, hey, you've done too much, chill out, back off, and get some rest? We can only know from the sound. The sound starts going. The purity of the sound goes down. I think that's the biggest thing, is that tone purity. It's hard to describe, but yes, when you reach that certain degree of fatigue, the only way to know is by how it sounds. It does not feel like anything. And because of this, there are a lot of people that over practice because they're waiting. Here's another thing that I hear online a lot, and it's just not true. There's a guy advertising on YouTube, on Facebook. It's actually quite irritating. He must have a lot of money to spend on ads. And one of his ads starts off with the statement that says, playing trumpet is an athletic event, or something along those lines. This is not true. It is not true. There is very little athleticism involved in what we do to play the trumpet well. If we're talking about beginners, if we're talking about just the beginners who have no lip strength whatsoever, yes, there is a slight element of athleticism involved there, getting the muscles tired, letting them rest, getting the muscles tired, letting them rest. But I'll tell you what, and yes, I'm not saying that there's none of that at the higher levels. It's such a small amount compared to what we need to do to get the mental stuff straight. And if you focus on the mental stuff, that physical stuff will take care of itself, period. Anyway, I hope that answers your question, Cardo. Hello, Jason. Jason says, good afternoon, sir. Thank you for talking about this. Well, you're welcome. Blifford Clown. Should I plan my solo out for all raging jazz, or should I really improvise it? Well, first of all, let's say that the improv etude is weighted less heavily than the written etudes. I think it's something like 65 to 50 or 75 to 50, something like that. Those the improv etude has very little value in your in what you do. It's almost, you can look at the improv as if it's extra credit. Whether or not you should actually truly improvise depends on how well you improvise. And should you plan your solo out? Planning your solo out might mean something different to you. Should you play a written solo that you've memorized? I'm not opposed to that. As a judge, I can tell when people are doing that. Okay? If I'm judging you and I hear you play a memorized solo, I can tell that you played a memorized solo. Maybe that's better than you just trying to improvise. If your improv is terrible, then it's, here's what I tell my students. I've been saying it this way for decades. I'm fundamentally opposed to music competition. Fundamentally, well, I only use that word when it's something that's what I believe, but I can't live that belief, right? So let me say that again. I use the word fundamentally when I'm trying to say this is what I believe, but hey, I can't practice that because it's not practical to practice that. So I tell people I'm fundamentally opposed to music competition. But music competition is just a fact of life. You have to compete or the opportunities don't open up to you. So since you have to compete anyway, then you might as well win. You might as well do what you have to do to win. Does that make sense? So to me, it's important to say these competitions are pointless. They're stupid. We say that this person's first chair, second chair, third chair, that's not real. That's the end result, the order that you get out of the competition, that's not real. And it says almost nothing about the people who won. It says almost nothing about what order people are in. This is what I mean when I say I'm fundamentally opposed. First of all, the competition doesn't mean anything. Second of all, it makes people do weird stuff. But if we're going to have to compete, do what you have to do to win. And if your improvisation is just terrible, then you need to look at some other option. Okay? Now, what's the best option? The best option is to really get your improv working really, really well between now and the audition. There's plenty of time. The blues stuff is pretty easy, and the all the things, no, there will never be another you. Pretty easy. Um, I'm working on a video for that right now, and but yes, If you can get your improv to sound like something, if you can make your and what are we talking about? We're talking about, does it sound like music? Let me tell you what doesn't work. And I'm very outspoken about this. Uh, that whole idea that on each chord you play certain notes for each chord. I don't teach that. I don't think that sounds good. I think so, and I learned this from a guitar player, believe it or not. When I was in college, there was a guitar player who came to the university. He was only like a year or two older than us, but he already had a full career as a jazz guitarist. Um, I forget his name, but he improvised in keys instead of, and that made sense to me later when I got this the the book. What's it called? Um, anyway, the Lydian chromatic book. I forget the guy that wrote it. Um, those two things went together in my head. The guy that taught us to improvise in keys, and then that Lydian chromatic book. It, the two ideas go together very, very well. So, like for example, when you're playing uh, "There Will Never Be Another You," you play, you shift key centers. Don't try to play the chords. Play the key center. This gives you more musical freedom to make a melody that sounds like something. If all you do is try to play the chords when you don't have the skill to play the chords, you would be better off playing a memorized solo. So, without knowing you more, I wouldn't be able to give you a straight answer as to, make this decision or make that decision. You have to ask yourself, which would be more not impressive. Don't try to impress judges. Judges can't be impressed like that. A lot of students make a big mistake trying to impress the judges. You're not good enough to impress them. I tell my students that want to impress, they want to impress me, they want to impress the teachers, they want to impress the judges, um, and I say, you're in high school. What are you going to do to impress us? It's not going to be with your high notes. It's not going to be with how fast you play. It's not going to be with your beautiful tone. What are you going to do to impress us? It's not going to happen. Okay? Don't try to impress. Um, do your best and give us hope. Give us hope for you. Show us what show us what your promise of in the future is. That's what your stance should be. Don't show us how good you are now. Show us how good what your potential is that you could be. I know that sounds philosophical. Every time someone tries to impress me, I have to really struggle not to put them lower than what they deserve. As in the judging, right? I have to really struggle to not give them a worse score than what they deserve because it makes them look like they think they're better than they are. And there's very few things that irk me more than that. as far as, performances go. People that think that they're better than they are. I would much rather have someone humbly come out and just be honest with us. Not just, I'm not just talking about competition, performances too. I would like people to come out and be honest and give their heart through the music. That's what matters to me. Anyway, any other questions? Hello, Jeffrey. What other questions do you guys have? Those were good questions already. Yeah, my whole approach to jazz improv is very different from anything I've seen out there. And, I got to this approach. I got to where I am today by trying all of theirs. I tried each one of those different ways. And to be very frank, none of it works. I think the worst way to teach jazz improv is what they actually teach almost everywhere, where you play this scale to this chord, play that scale to that chord. You know that you can play a lot of wrong notes that way? Did you know that? So if we have a 3-6-2-5-1, if we have a 3-6-2-5-1 in the key of C, we'll put it in the key of C to make it simple. Right? If you have that chord, there are people that teach that first scale to go with the first chord is Dorian. And that the second one is Mixolydian. So that the way they play this 3-6-2-5-1, 3-6-2-5-1 is a turnaround. The way they play that, it's as if there's a modulation in the key of D for a measure and the key of C for a measure. This is not right. So they will play. That's not right. It's a 3 chord, not a 2 chord. So that first one should be, if you are going to do scales to the chord, I don't teach that. But if that's how you're going to do it, you have to acknowledge that it's a 3 chord. With the F natural and the C natural in it. It's a 3 chord. F natural on that next one. Or you can have something else. You can have that if you have like a flat 9. But, there's so many people that are so stuck in this. This is the chord, the scale you play for that chord. And it produces some extremely unmusical results. It makes improv that sounds like a bunch of notes. So, based on what I learned from that one guitar player, and based on the reading that I did with the the what's the book? Lydian Chromatic Concept. Based on what I learned from that stuff. With all of my students, when we first start with the jazz improv, we learn what we call horizontal improvisation first. We all learn to improvise horizontally first. And then we can start doing some of the other stuff as we go. I'm not saying that we don't do what you call it, the vertical stuff. We do play chords, but that's a more advanced technique. And here's another thing I'll say about the chords is the way I teach my students to play the chords is through the language. And, I think I mentioned this before. I had a friend on one of the gigs that says to me, I still want to take lessons from you, but can you tell me what it is that you teach? And I told him basically the biggest difference is that the way I teach the language. And he was like, language, what's that? Is that what chords you play? No, I said, no, it's not the chords. Is that what scales you play? No, it's not the scales. And when I explained it to him, it was almost at that point like he wasn't interested, because that's what I'm saying. These guys they get caught up so much that's what jazz playing is that you do this over that chord, you do this over that chord, and I don't teach that. I teach the language. So what is the language? The language is when you take jazz motifs and string them together to make a jazz phrase. So a motif in jazz tends to be a 5-note pattern. I shouldn't use the word pattern. That's not a pattern. Pattern is something that repeats. A motif is just a single statement of that thing. So okay. Okay. That's two different motifs. And then there's another motif. Now I'm taking that's 3 motifs that I use to create a lick or a phrase. There's 5 motifs now. When I'm improvising, I'm taking those motifs. I've learned now literally hundreds of these motifs, and I string them together one after another. Then that's how I can have a phrase that sounds like something. It doesn't sound like. It doesn't sound like an exercise. I can take a bunch of these motifs, string them together, and make a jazz phrase out of it. I'll try to do it like slow motion right now. That was just one motif after another, strung together until I run out of air, right? And if I didn't have to breathe, I could have just kept going and going and going, and it would. What I just did now sounds like jazz. If you don't have the motifs, it sounds like something else. It doesn't sound like jazz. That doesn't sound like jazz to me. Put a bunch of motifs together, and now you've got something that sounds like jazz. Why? Because it is the jazz language. Those motifs that I'm stringing together are not motifs I invented. Those are motifs that I gained from studying all the greats. Motifs. You take somebody that the way they've been practicing jazz is to take this scale and put it on that chord. Take that scale and put it on that chord. They can't do what I just did. They can't do that. The closest thing that some of these guys can get to that is when they study somebody else's solo and play Freddie Hubbard's lick, play Clifford Brown's lick. But what I've done is I come up with a system to break that lick apart into motifs. And I learned that motif separately. Well, no, I shouldn't say separately, but as a unit. I learned this motif, I learned that motif. And now I can put those motifs together the way we speak when we speak in sentences. That's what makes my way of teaching jazz different. That's what makes what I play sound like jazz. So when we play a song like I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Well, let's use Blue Bossa, right? So I'm taking the motifs that outline the harmonies and using those motifs to play those harmonies. Okay, so you can actually hear in my improv, you can actually hear the chords better than if I was going right. If I was just trying to play the notes that go with the chord, you wouldn't hear in what I improvise without the rhythm section, you wouldn't actually hear that progression as well as someone that uses the language to emphasize that progression. I hope that makes sense. So anyway, any other questions? It's great to see so many people on here. In the summer, just being already full-fledged, full throttle already. And to see so many people still making the effort to be here, that's great. Any other questions? Can be trumpet questions, jazz questions, music questions, music theory stuff, composition stuff. Music history. What questions you guys have? T. Purdock, Eddie, would creatine or protein shakes help with embouchure strength? No, I don't think so. Okay, let me backtrack on that a little bit. If you do have a deficiency, which most people in the modern world don't have a protein deficiency, okay? If you do have a protein deficiency, then you should do something to get that straightened out. And yes, it will have a impact. But remember what I was saying earlier, I was talking earlier about that one guy with the advertisement that starts off saying, Trumpet is a athletic event. It's not true. The strength that we need is not near what we think it is. The embouchure strength we need is not anywhere near what we think it is. Most of it is just mental, period. And you can say, well, that's not true. When I play and it's not coming out, that's entirely physical. Yes, the manifestation of that mental state is that the physical stuff doesn't come out. But it's not because your lips aren't strong enough. So no, I don't think, generally speaking, that extra protein would help. Hello, Julie. How would you approach program clubbing an adult player who hasn't played in a while in general? So I treat, so here's the thing. When I'm working with children, I don't treat them like children. Does that make sense? I don't, I homeschooled my son. I never talked to him. And I found out later that you're supposed to talk, like there's like psychological reasons to talk, baby talk to your children. I never did that. So I don't actually treat the adults different. And so when someone hasn't played in a while, we almost sort of go back to the beginning. And here's my approach to that. So let's say somebody comes to me, they say, I'm a comeback player, I haven't played in 30 years. We go back to the beginning to like the very first steps of playing the trumpet. If they do that well, we just move on real quick. I would much rather, and what I used to do in the old days is I would say I would listen to them play and try to place them by how skilled they sound to me now. So I would listen to them and say, well, it sounds like you're at this level. So we start doing books at that level. The problem is I got it wrong, and there were aspects of their playing that I missed in my evaluation that we had to now go backwards to go fix. And that's not ideal. So what I do is I take everybody to the beginning. The best example of that is like for the jazz stuff, right? Someone could already be a professional, and to me, I'm going to start them still at the same song as I start the beginners. And same thing with someone who's all they want to do is play trumpet and play trumpet well. They're a comeback player. They come in. I'm going to start them on the very first routine The easiest routine. If that goes well, we'll move on real quick. We'll move on in the next lesson. If it doesn't go well, we have to stay at that level and get that worked out. I would much rather have that worked out at the lowest level. And you know what that does? Is that helps them with their confidence. Unless they have some sort of ego trip going on, right? Like I thought I was better than that. Um, and I'm very sensitive to that kind of thing. If it does seem to me like they have an ego thing going, then I might not go all the way back to beginner level. If it seems to me like they can't handle that, then you get all kinds of different kinds of people, right? So if they can't handle the idea that they're going all the way back to the beginner level, then we might not do that. Okay. Well, I am still practical, but yes, I want to go all the way back just to make sure. So anyway, I'm on a tangent. What I was saying is there are benefits to going back to the beginner level so that the foundation that you have in this return to the trumpet, this foundation can be deeply rooted and really greatly enhance the experience that they have. I hope that makes sense, right? If you just jump in, now I do have students that they just want to jump in and have fun, and they're not really that serious about it, right? They want to just jump in and have fun, and it doesn't matter to them how good they do. Then, like once again, I say I'm sensitive to that. But the ones who really do want to actually improve, then we jump in there and go back to those foundational things and make sure that stuff is right first. That's a if we want to talk about my overall approach, we go back to beginner. Now, getting from beginner to a more intermediate or even more advanced level is like that. If they were a great player before, they snap through these different things, and a lot of it. So like in the first 2 or 3 lessons, we might spend a lot of time just sight reading through some really easy stuff, but that way we cover all the bases and we make sure that there wasn't something lurking that's going to cause trouble down the road. We don't want that. So T says, could you please elaborate a little more on the mental aspect? So the way I like to explain this is the physical aspects of trumpet playing happen at such a minute level that our conscious minds are incapable of 2 things. We're incapable of sensing what's going on. We don't know what's going on here. We're incapable of feeling it, but we're also incapable of controlling it with our conscious minds. And this is especially true when we talk about the quality. So, those people that say it's not about getting the notes, it's how you play the notes. The difference between those two is not something you can change with your conscious mind. That's my belief. If you've got a bad sound on the high notes, there's nothing you can change to get a better sound on the high notes. You can get a better sound on a high note by doing a change that some teacher tells you. But when you start playing music again, where it's going to be louder one time, softer the next time, coming from a low note to a high note, coming from a really high note to a medium note, when you start adding that chaos, that whatever that teacher told you to do to get a better sound on that high note, it's gone. because it's way, way beyond what we can control here. And it's even way, way beyond what we can sense. So, if it can't be done with your conscious mind, it has to be done with your subconscious mind. Your subconscious mind, when I talk about the mental aspects, I'm talking about the role of the subconscious mind. It is our subconscious mind that plays the trumpet, not our conscious mind. Everything about the way I teach is designed to help you develop your subconscious. Every single thing that I teach is meant to help you master that part of your mind. Okay? To help you do better on the trumpet via the subconscious thoughts. And it's all because of how minute the actions are. The change that has to happen in your lips on a high note, let's say high C, the change that has to happen in your lips between a good sounding high C and a pitched sound is way far beyond what you can do with your conscious mind. You are incapable of doing anything to get a better sound. You can try a different mouthpiece. You can try different range exercises. You can try all that stuff. If it doesn't change the way you think in your subconscious mind, it won't change your sound. And to a lesser degree, that's the same thing applies to how high you can play. If you don't change the mental side of it, if you don't try and change the subconscious, then the high notes won't come out. The higher you go, the more true this is. Okay, I hope that explains it for you. Julie says, thank you. Beginner works for me. It is what I was thinking as well. I want to learn it right from the beginning. There you go. Hello, Jordan. Jordan says, Jazre and Kalino say aloha from Hawaii. Well, aloha, thank you. We love your videos. We're learning so much. Mahalo. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you guys saying so. Yeah, thanks for hopping in. Yeah, I hope that explains the mental side of it. Hello, Karen. Karen says, I think my subconscious mind gets tired. That's true. I can agree with that. And then my conscious mind trips all over itself. Sometimes I play right through something, and other times I get it all mixed up. Why? Well, okay, so here's the thing about the subconscious mind and what we have to do for music is that there are certain patterns. And so what happens is that if we don't train enough of these different patterns, and we keep going this way, keep going this way, keep going this way, and then the music says, okay, time to go this way, we can oftentimes just out of habit, and habit, what is habit? Habit is this mental stuff we're talking about. A lot of times we will end up going in that direction just because we haven't actually trained enough of these different ways. So a great example of that is the key signatures. One of the phenomenon that I've noticed in my teaching career is that so you guys, a lot of you guys know about my tonalization studies, right? So The tonalization studies are skills that make you start to think in the key. And they're so effective that in the lessons, we will do tonalization studies at the beginning of the lesson. Let's say, for example, they do it in 3 flats. And then we have a etude or something that we do in their lesson after that, that's in 2 sharps. And throughout the whole etude, the students keep playing 3 flats. Why is that? Well, that's happening because those tonalization studies are so effective. It's sort of like a magnet, and the students are so stuck now in that key. It's like a gravity that they can't switch in their mind back to the 2 sharps again. So this is a very, very common thing. So what's the answer to that? The answer to that is to master all 12 keys. Once you master all 12 keys, switching from one key to the next, I'm not saying it's perfect all of a sudden, but it's a lot easier because now you have these 12 different channels that you can go through. And it's the same thing with rhythms. It's the same thing with all kinds of stuff on the instrument. Yeah, we get stuck in certain patterns, and it can be difficult to get out of those patterns. And the best solution to that is to hit more of those patterns, not less. And for that matter, practicing more music will do that for you. If you practice music instead of exercises, no, well, you know what I mean. You guys know that I teach the 50% rule. If at least 50% of your practice time is on music, then you are covering more of those things because that's what music does. And just over time, you get used to that and it starts to work out. I hope that makes sense. Any other questions? This was a good one. James says, hello, James. Do key center motifs work over all the chord changes, or do you have to learn separate major motifs, minor motifs, diminished motifs, and special? Some of them have tendencies. Some of them do not. So, for example, when I gave the example for the blue bossa, right? That can work over now we don't think in terms of major, minor, or diminished. What we think in terms of is the role within the key. So we have subdominant, we have dominant, and we have tonic. What I just played there in the key of F, that's a motif that works over the subdominant as well as over the dominant. Now you can have a superimposed dominant over a tonic. Clifford Brown used to do that all the time. Okay? Charlie Parker used to do that all the time. Where the dominant is like sometimes as much as 2 bars late. Right? So he'll play a dominant over, and when I say dominant, I'm talking about dominant motifs. Dominant motifs that he's playing over a tonic chord. and then resolving later on that tonic. But that's how I think. I'm not thinking in terms of major or minor or diminished. I'm thinking in terms of subdominant, dominant, and tonic. I hope that makes sense. Jason asks, how do I contact you privately? The best way to do that is to go to my website, eddielewis.com. I'll put it in the... If you go to eddielewis.com, there is a contact form, and you can contact me there. All right. So, any other questions? James, I hope that answered your question. So the motifs do have tendencies in that regard. The tendencies are more not major or minor. The motifs tend to be dominant, subdominant, or tonic. Those are the only three options, by the way. And we can have, there's not enough time to talk about now how all of those layer over each other, because there's sometimes where you, like a D minor chord in the key of C, D minor chord can be used as a dominant. It all depends on the context. The D minor, so what is the typical subdominant, dominant tonic is the 2-5-1. In jazz, the 2 chord is the subdominant. What do we mean by subdominant? The subdominant is the chord that you use to set up the dominant. So we have the subdominant. The dominant is typically the 5 chord, the G7, D minor 7, G7. The tonic is typically the C major chord. Now, what happens if you have a 3-6-2-5-1 coming out of a 2-5? D minor 7 is the 2. That's subdominant. The G7 is the 5, which is the dominant. And then we go to a E minor 7. What is the E minor 7? In this case, the E minor 7 is tonic. It's a substitution for the C. So whatever you would have played, even though it's a minor chord, whatever you would have played, whatever motif you would have used on the C major chord in a 2-5-1 also is going to work just as well on the E minor chord. Because the E minor chord in that case is functioning as a tonic. You see how that works? So it's not, when we talk about what the chord progressions are, those chord progressions are not always straightforward in terms of the role that they play. I hope that makes sense. Anyway. Looks like we have enough time for one question if it's a short one. Anybody have anything? Otherwise, we'll close it down for this week. Nice to see all you guys here. Thanks for hanging out. All right, I guess we'll call it quits. Thank you again. I hope you guys have a blessed weekend. God bless you guys, and we will see you next time. Have a great week. Bye bye.